Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1468 of the Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Brad Rowland, coming to you on a Monday evening into Tuesday. And today's show is brought to you by PrizePicks. If you're a first-time user, you can have 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code Locked On. That is PrizePicks.com, promo code Locked On. I also want to tell you at the top of the podcast to please check us out anywhere you get your podcasts and make us your first listen each and every day on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, YouTube, etc. And I'm joined on this podcast by my friend Glen Willis of Peachtree Hoops and AT1129, actually part 1 of 2 with Glen. A fun conversation, twists and turns. Glen is fantastic with the analytics side of things, X's and O's, etc., and a fun Hawks talk dating back to the playoffs, looking ahead at what's to come, and all of that fun stuff in between. After a short delay to hear from our introduction to the podcast, I'll be back with myself and Glen Willis.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
I'm joined once again by frequent guest of this podcast and resident Hawks X's and O's expert and all kinds of things. Glen Willis is back. Hello, sir. How are you?
I'm good, Brad. Thanks for having me back. Look forward to looking back to a playoff series. It feels like it was like a month ago now. So many things have happened.
Yeah.
I don't think it was that long ago, but a chance to kind of look back with maybe a little different perspective.
Yeah. I mean, it's good to kind of sit at the table with that. I mean, it's been more than a week now since the series ended, as people are listening to this podcast. And, you know, we're not quite into the meat of the offseason just yet with the draft cycle. I know I already did a draft podcast. I talked to my friend Tower Jones on the show about some offseason stuff. Like, I'm kind of in the balancing mode now. It's like, you don't want to just empty the clip on offseason talk in early May. Yeah. You have so long to go. And I figure it's probably worth taking kind of a pretty sober approach and just kind of like remembering what happened in the playoff series and how it affects the future and observations. And I think we've had time now to kind of study this a little bit more. Not that I've been watching tape nonstop of the playoff series since it ended, trying to take a little bit of a break on some level from all of that stuff. But I guess I'll just start here. I know you and Kevin Chenard, my mutual adversary, talked about this on your show, ATL on 29 after the series. But like, you know, it's been a few days now. Like, what's sort of your top line reaction / takeaway from what we saw? Because I think they were pretty competitive. That's nice to see. Is it that, or is it where's sort of your head at when I say, all right, talk to me about the playoff series?
Yeah. So for me, I think the top takeaway is that they are still pretty close offensively to being what they need to be. There's some work to do. Yeah, I mean, most people may have seen it when I posted it, but it took me 2 or 3 tries to get it exactly right. if you don't use NBA.com stats where it resets your filter every time you change anything, you're gonna.
It's the worst. It's the worst.
It's bad. So anyway, I blame that completely, even though I'm completely capable of making my own mistakes and probably contributed to that a little bit. But you know, they went basically from 29th in spot up shooting efficiency. Sorry, second in spot up shooting efficiency to 29th. That's kind of the big offensive theme across the series. They still managed the last month and a half, 2 months to become a top 5 offense again. You know, Quinn, I think, helped a little bit. I think adding a shooter like Bay helped a little bit. Getting healthy kind of at the right time, you know, probably helped a little bit there too. But I still think you kind of look across the series and the Miami game, which still kind of feels like a series, you know, when I think about it, and realize like when they had enough shooting on the floor, they're still one of the elite offenses in the league. Can they do that consistently? The regular season one, I think, fairly make us question, like, where are they from a consistency standpoint? Fair thing to question. But I think they're closer on offense. On defense, they're very dependent upon putting functional defensive lineups on the floor, keeping functional defensive lineups on the floor, which was a struggle against that in that Boston series. For example, getting Murray plus Bay on together, rough. You know, Eddie's combination of Bogey plus another, you know, really kind of challenged defender was kind of rough. But that worked against Miami because Miami doesn't have the same sort of threatening ball movement and, you know, dribble creation and all that sort of stuff. So I still think we look at this team and think, I think the template is top 3 offense being the goal and finding a way to get good enough defensive lineups on the floor that don't sacrifice too much shooting, which was the error I think made in the preseason. So you take that away and be like, Dejounte had really good offensive stats across the series,
Mm-hmm.
and he was a minus like 9 or something like that, in his own net rating. It was just kind of brutal. So that the highlight to me is that they're pretty close offensively, getting the right optimization there. Defensively, there's still some work to do, and they have to do that work without tanking their offense too much, which they did this past season.
Yeah, I mean they kind of overcorrected, and that's we've talked about that a lot. And I get the theory of what they tried to do, and Murray was kind of the way that it was presented was that he was the two-way fix. Like, he's the guy who does both for you. He's the guy who can help your defense and give you that coveted number 2 option. I think the number 2 option happened more than the defense if you watch the team closely this year. But yeah, I mean, I'm with you. I think that I've tried to be intentional about, like, really not on purpose. I mean, I'm not misleading anyone, but I'm pretty optimistic by what we saw in the playoffs. I think that's a real thing. And taking a Boston team that was number 1 seed level. I mean, you can argue about them. They weren't the number 1 seed. They were number 2 seed, but they had, and I mean, as far as like advanced analytics and stuff like that, they had the best profile in the whole league this year. They were that good. They made it, and maybe they lose in the playoffs or whatever, but they were healthy and playing at that level for large portions of that series. And the Hawks pushed them, and that win in Game 5. I mean, it's one game, granted, but to do that and win on the road there as a giant underdog, to the point where I had Boston folks saying, like, hey, that was really impressive from the Hawks. Like, to me, just kind of out of nowhere. That's all very impressive and very good. My secondary takeaway, though, and I wonder what you think about. You kind of got to this too, is that the Hawks continue to have some struggles with putting out lineups that can do both, that can score and defend. And that's a very simple concept, but it's something you have to have at the highest levels in particular. Sometimes it doesn't always show up in the regular season, and sometimes it does. I mean, people like you and I watch every single game. Like, it does show up. But in the playoffs, in that, you could say the playoff crucible, however you want to say that, you can't, it's harder to hide. You can't have lineups that can't do both. And the Hawks had a lot of lineups that can't do both. And I think they know it, which is a positive thing. Now, fixing it is a different thing altogether. But I'm with you. I mean, the archetype, I think I talked about this with Tyler on my most recent podcast too. It's like, it's still, when you have Trae Young, it's not just Trae, but the way they built their roster, they have to be awesome on offense, and it's, can you be good enough on defense? We saw, to be optimistic again, and we'll get into this, I guess, a little bit more now, we saw the offensive blueprint. They were top 5 in the league after the All-Star break. They scored like almost 120 points, all right, more than 120 points per 100 possessions against Boston in the series. And yeah, that's good. It's all very, very solid, whatever it was. We saw that, and I think Trae plus shooting, at least enough shooting, is a pretty proven entity on offense. I have almost no doubt, and maybe you do, I have almost no doubt, as long as Trae is healthy, particularly now with Quin, if they have just any kind of shooting around Trae, they're going to be very good on offense. Does that sound right? I mean, defensively, we'll get to that in a second too, but offensively, like, you kind of saw what it looks like.
Yeah, from a regular season perspective, yes, right? There are challenges that come in the postseason where you need more dribble creation, more secondary creation, et cetera. That got exposed against Boston for stretches. Yep. Trae, as few players in the league can do, overcame that individually. Like that Game 5 he closed out was a monumental 4 minutes or whatever it was, where he made, you don't attack the last 4 minutes of a game. You absolutely have to win with the shot profile he went after. But he's one of the guys who can do that, I guess, confidently. But again, if you were planning on winning 2-3 playoff series, maybe getting to the finals, those are not the shots you're chasing the last 4 minutes of a close game. You have to win. They're just not, right? Yeah. Now, it was a fun thing to watch for Hawks fans, for sure, right? And it was just a really exciting, kind of stretch of play for Trae and the Hawks. But when you're kind of engineering or trying to engineer a team that can, really, really go deep, that's not what you're looking for there. That Hawks team against that Celtics teams, that's what they had available, and Trae knocked those shots down. But again, I think that's important to not. I think it's important to not think, oh, we can take that to the drawing board and make that a central part of kind of our offensive plan. No, But I think from a regular season perspective, if you even have a league average shooting team around Trae with the right kind of functional bigs in terms of screening and rolling and diving and things like that. Now, if you can start adding some short roll mix in the 4 and the 5, a little ball handling in the 4 and the 5, I think you kind of open up where you can leverage that shooting even more. And it's not just up to Trey to generate those, those perimeter shots. But from a regular season perspective, I don't think there's a ton of work to do with this roster to kind of get them to the point where they should be able to kind of be top 5.
Today's show is brought to you by the award-winning app at PrizePicks. PrizePicks is daily fantasy made easy. It's amazing. I know that you will love it as well. It's very easy to use. We're up to 25 times the money on your entries at PrizePicks. They have safe and fast withdrawals, and every single day during the NBA playoffs, one PrizePicks user will actually win a chance to become a millionaire. One entry placed after 8 a.m. Eastern time will be randomly selected each day. Whoever placed that entry will be given a 6-pack flex with the following payouts. If you get all 6 picks correct, it's $1 million. 5 out of 6, $80,000, 4 out of 6, $16,000. And full details can be found at prizepicks.com/million. You must opt in at that link to be eligible for the $1 million entry. Once you opt in, all you have to do is go and play like you always do at PrizePicks. You can be the lucky winner. Download the PrizePicks app right now. Go to prizepicks.com, sign up and play daily fantasy sports. If you're a first-time user as well, you get 100% as a deposit match up to $100 with the promo code Locked On. Don't forget that promo code Locked On at sign up with the instant deposit match up to $100. Check it out now at PrizePicks. And one more time, it's prizepicks.com/million. Personnel wise, we can always talk about that more if you want, and I'm sure we will, about what they need and all that stuff on offense. I want to know, since I have you here and this is kind of much more your field than mine, I wonder what you thought of the plan on offense in the playoffs. Obviously execution matters at the highest level all the time, but as far as like what they were running, adjustments they made over the course of the series, what did you what kind of stood out to you about like how they approached the offense, knowing that, the one game without Dejounte, they didn't have Dejounte. That obviously was a different animal altogether. But the other 5 games, they were at full strength. Granted, playing an elite defense, which definitely factors into your plans. Like Boston is different than most defenses. They can switch. They can play. They can do all kinds of things. That was a great test for them. But I wonder what stood out to you, like how they actually approached it beyond the personnel.
Yeah. So my recollection is the first 2 games, basically Trey could get no space in the middle at all. Right.
Yeah.
But they would give Dejounte a bunch of space in the middle. And Dejounte carried the offense for long stretches of the first 2 games of the series. In time, I think what Quin saw and put into motion was a couple things. One is the Celtics respected Hunter as a shooter. And so it didn't have to be Bogey and Bay and punting all that defense. It could be Hunter plus one of those 2, right? And for maybe minutes when, say, Tatum is off, you can get Bogey and Bay together and kind of be selective about those minutes. But Hunter basically got into the mix to the same level as Bogey and Bay for the most part. And that lineup or that rotation tweak allowed Trey to start getting space in the middle, and he did a ton with it. As you can see, if you're watching the game or just go back and look at the stats, he did absolutely a ton with it. The other part was Quin just kind of, getting into the ears of guys like JC and Jalen and just being like, you got to take those shots. Like, I don't care if you've missed your last 3 and you're not feeling good or whatever. Like, for this to work, for us to give Trey the space he wants, you got to take those shots. Hopefully you make some and they start reacting a little bit. Jalen got much more comfortable just letting it fly. And he shot the ball overall pretty well, in that series. It wasn't a big volume at all. And as the series went on, JC kind of seemed to find a little bit of rhythm shooting the basketball, and that helped as well. So to me, the 2 things were recognizing, okay, the 3 perimeter shooters that we're using to space the floor are Bay, Bogey, Hunter. Keep 2 on at all times, if at all possible. And then these other guys who aren't your, shooters that you want as your first choice, still got to let it fly. And that kind of unlocked the space that Trey needed to work, and he did great work with it.
Yeah, there's this interesting balance that I've found, even talking to people offline versus on the podcast, of like, I'm not trying to act like Boston is the greatest defense of all time, but it's appropriate to kind of just point out that they were facing a very, very, very good defense. You know what I mean? And that's what you have to strive for. And that, on one hand, you want to credit them. And on the other hand, for the Hawks, it's like, it can't be an excuse if you want to get where you want to get eventually. Not this year, I guess. That was never really going to happen, I don't think, this year. But like, that's the kind of defense they're going to have to beat. And they did figure some things out. It helps to have Trey at full capacity, which is where he kind of was. And by the end of the series, he was playing great. But it's never just that. I thought it was stark. And I saw your numbers that you tweeted out earlier as well about like the lineup stuff. And, Bogey had by far the best plus minus on the team in the series. And that was not a surprise to see that when you watch the games, but it was stark. And it kind of goes to the point that I know you and I have both made, like how much he unlocks for them offensively. And you don't want to be so reliant on a guy like Bogey, who is at this point a supporting piece, but they just signed him to an extension, all those things. But and it's not a shock because he's one of the only guys on their roster that can get his own shot and shoot. And obviously he gets guarded. Like, I mean, you talked about the way Hunter was being guarded, and I agree with you. Bogey, I think, was still the guy that Boston probably feared the most as a shooter. If you watch the, I mean, does that sound right in what you saw? Because it stood out to me. Like they were flying at him. It felt like.
So on the move, yes, I still think Bay has such a quick shot. It's so efficient that when Bay's defender gets further from him, they work to get back really hard, and that has a different impact. Bogey's defender just never gets that far from him. Bogey has to
that's
move.
a good point. Yeah,
right. So it's a kind of a similar dynamic, but it plays out differently. The other thing offensively that has to be pointed out, and we saw kind of more of this manifestation in Game 1 versus the Sixers, but Trey increasingly went after Al Horford, like Game 3, Game 4, Game 5, and the Game 6. Right, he wanted that switch, and he went at it. And Al was I thought, incredible defending on the interior, like helping from wherever he was, and the Hawks really tried to kind of switch up who they were setting up where to try to kind of keep Al out of such an advantageous position. But Al on the perimeter, I mean, we're all getting older every day. We're all moving. My phrase is we're all marching in the same direction, including Al Horford. It's as crazy as like his productivity has been, but he's not the same perimeter. You can see right now he's not the same perimeter defender. And Trey got a lot out of that matchup, and the Sixers are trying to make that happen too. And it's going to be interesting to see as that series progresses if they can kind of keep Robert Williams and Al to be more of guys that are impacting the defensive interior, or if the Sixers can kind of draw Al out specifically and take advantage of him that way. But Trey wanted that, went at that a lot. And got a lot out of it, and that was something else that kind of just kept getting a little bit more of a priority each game as the series progressed.
Yeah, they were targeting it, and I know that not every Hawks fan loves Al for how it ended. He is kind of targeted to what you and I appreciate about basketball, so I think you and I are pretty high on Al. But
huge fan.
But I will say, Al's older than I am, which is all you need to know. I mean, he's one of the only guys in the league that's older than I am. So I have that flag planted. He's barely older than me. We're basically the same age. But that kind of tells you Al's not young anymore.
I have to go to baseball and talk about what Julio Franco did at a certain age.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's still some guys. I mean, LeBron's older than me. There's a few, just a small handful. I don't think there's anybody that's older than you, Glenn. I don't want to out you on your age. I don't think any active players are older than you. But
if I had a basketball reference page, the nickname would be Methuselah or something like that. I think.
maybe Donis Haslam's getting up there, and I'm not sure how old Udonis is at this point. He might be 107. Anyway, so as far as like, I think we all know the pillars here. I want to take you back to on offense still, and we'll go to defense in a second too. Take you back to what we talked about in September, October, or even during the season pre-Quin. About like just the theory of the case with, let's just say Trey and Dejounte, not just those guys, but like the theory of now we have this guy who can run the team when Trey sits and all of that. And we don't have to do like the 30-minute version of this conversation because there is one. Dejounte, you talked about him earlier, which is what reminded me to ask you this. I thought he played very well offensively in the series. The numbers were good when obviously he missed the one game, but the numbers were good when he played offensively. He kind of did what, in theory, he was asked to do when they acquired him on offense. Be the guy who can carry usage. He took more threes, which I think Quin liked and talked about a couple of different times. Like he was eager to shoot threes, which is good. What did you make of even just the theory and execution of that? Of like, we have this guy we're obviously so invested in as our number 2 guy. It didn't always work in during the regular season, but like at the highest level, that's kind of why they brought Dejounte in, was for this moment. And defense is another thing, but offensively, do you think it kind of started to look like it's supposed to look?
Yeah. So, I mean, the thing for me is the number one evaluation for him is when the other team is just taking Trey off the ball, just not giving Trey anything that he wants, can he step in and just carry that workload and do enough? And I thought he did. Yeah. I thought he's great getting in, to the middle, and he was, he's not the guy you want to sling up a million threes, but I mean, again, if he's open, he's got to take that shot. And he I thought he had good decision making around his shot selection, just generally speaking, But I mean, they came out, of the first two games, despite losing them both. I think having something to build on, in large part because Dejounte kind of gave them some juice when like nothing else was working, and I think that's kind of the first thing is, can you step in and get our offense to some minimum level of productivity when the other team's just really doing everything to take Trey away. So I think that's great. And then he struggled for sure in Game 6 coming off the suspension.
Yeah,
like couldn't make a shot, but then you look up, you're like, oh, he's got 7 assists, and so I thought he kind of adjusted even a little bit in that game to recognize that there was space he was creating for others and to make simple passes and things like that. So, I still think from a macro perspective, there's still a lot of work to do to optimize those two. And I'd love to sit down and like really hear Quin talk honestly about what that plan is.
Me too. I love that,
because I think there's a ways to go. But if the first factor is, can he step in and be the offensive engine when Trey just can't, based on what the defense is able to do? I think that he's satisfied. He's passed that evaluation in my view. Now, optimizing those two, I think there's quite a bit of work to do around that part.
Today's show is brought to you by Game Time. If you've ever been trying to find tickets for a big event at the last minute, it can be really stressful. Probably not the best idea for your emotions or your wallet even. After all, buying tickets should not be a hassle. And with Game Time, you have the fastest, easiest way to buy tickets for sports and music and comedy, theater, anything you want to get a ticket for. With killer deals and lots of event tickets and their best price guarantee, you can also avoid stress and getting hyped for the fun you'll actually have, which is much more fun anyway. Spring is here, and there's certainly tons of events around me in Atlanta. I'm sure there are around you as well. And with Game Time, there are flash deals and last-minute tickets, and it's so easy to find and buy tickets for any kind of event you're looking for. You can see images about where the tickets are actually going to be, where your seats would be, and they have protection if your event happens to get canceled. Forget planning months in advance. There are deals on tickets right up to the day of the event at Game Time, and Game Time guarantee also means you'll get the best possible price. If you find tickets in the same section in the same row for less, Game Time will credit you 100%, 110% of the difference. It's the fastest growing ticketing app in the country for a reason. You can buy tickets just a matter of seconds, plus those tickets are actually sent directly to your phone to make things very easy for you. Download the Game Time app right now, create an account, use the promo code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem that promo code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. I agree. I do want to. This is going to get into our. I'm doing this way too often. I'm going to reference our friend Andrew Kelly, which I keep doing. And hello, Andrew, if you're listening. Andrew, and I think he's right about this for the most part. I'm sure he doesn't want me to say that out loud. One of his pet peeves on this roster is the fact that they have so little ball handling creation ability in the front court in general. And that includes Hunter. I mean, Hunter, basically the starting trio of the front court, and not having really anyone that can get their own of those guys. John in his mismatch can do it, obviously. Hunter has a little bit of that off his pull-up game, but you know what I mean? Generally speaking, Hunter's ball handling, Collins is a 4, Capella in particular, not a great, decision maker with the ball in his hands, all that stuff. I wonder what you think of what that looked like in the playoffs, because it's a small sample, and you talked about it earlier. I thought Collins found kind of some more rhythm, and not only as a shooter, but it was stark to me, and I bet you noticed it too, that the game Murray didn't play was the game that Collins had the most juice. And it was not a coincidence, I don't think. And that's not a negative about Murray. It's just that Murray was kind of the guy that really minimized John even more. And I think him not being there was more room to operate and more of a role for that. But I mean, I guess in general, I'm not asking that you to blow up the front court, because that's not going to be our job on this particular podcast. But does that strike you as a potential pivot point in the future potentially? Because, I do think that against a lot of good defenses, one like Boston, having somebody there or having a little bit more collective juice, playmaking, short roll ability, however you want to put it, for all these different, there's 3 guys, so it's difficult to do that. But do they need more of that, generally speaking?
So they do, but I want to contextualize that. So both Hunter and Collins were individually negative 2.2 net rating in the series, where the Hawks were negative 4.5.
Yep.
Well, when they were on together, they were negative 0.3, right? So that if you go look at, what helped them be above the baseline, the team's baseline, The offense wasn't good. It was all
No,
defense.
it was the defense.
It was all defense.
I almost said it to you later. I was going to say it for later, but yeah, if you look at the individual on-offs, Collins' defensive rating is like 10 points better than everybody else's. He was so far and away the best defender in like every metric in the series. It was crazy.
Yeah. And he was really good. And, but I have to kind of, qualify a little bit that, again, the Celtics don't have a lot of guys who beat you with their first step. So Collins can handle that decently. Yeah. I'm not here to say he can handle like Tatum for 30 minutes. No one's saying that, right?
No.
But if you need like, oh man, I need 3 minutes while this guy's has foul trouble or the guy gets a breather, Collins is not going to kill you around that. But for me, I think that the issue that surfaces is this. I get a little frustrated with fans. And I always try to remind myself, they're fans, right? They're looking for an ideal kind of path, an ideal future and things like that. And I feel like they're like, oh, they have to trade both Hunter and JC and get guys who can shoot and dribble and all this sort of stuff. Yeah. And I want to be like, the defense is still going to be an issue. For me, I feel like what they need is an alternative for when they get into a certain matchup where the opposing defense, like Miami did last year, like the Celtics did in games 1 and 2 this year, where there has to be a tertiary creator of some sort, and that's typically going to land in your front court, right? There has to be something there. Gallo did that, 2 years ago. Last year, he wasn't really the same guy. It was during the middle of the season, but towards the end, he was really banged up and, all that sort of stuff. But I feel like what the roster lacks is not necessarily and we could talk about the offseason, what we think is going to happen, but I don't think it's like firmly has to be send out Hunter or send out Collins, bring back guys that I think it's an alternative. Is Jalen becoming that kind of a guy? I don't think he's there, but I think he is making progress towards being an alternative. Bay, as rough as he was on defense against Boston, his ability to attack closeouts and kind of get the ball down into the paint.
Yep.
They had to have, like, Quinn had to put him on the court. He had to, right? Because if you watch Boston, it's drive and kick and drive and kick and drive and kick and kind of break you down with that. Or the Hawks is Trey, Hunter, drive and turn over, or JC drive, get stuck, and that kind of breaks down the way the typical kind of actions that you look to in the playoff setting, especially to kind of break the second, third, fourth, fifth effort, right? The Hawks can't get to that with their starting lineup on the floor. So again, my mindset is not that, we've got to send these guys out.
Mm-hmm.
My mindset is they need alternatives, right? And maybe there's some of that already on this roster. When can AJ be that in a playoff context? When can Jalen be that in a larger workload in a playoff context? Probably not next year, not in the second round of the playoffs or something like that. Or maybe you're just like, man, we're going to force feed those guys and get them there across the season. Or there is a big trade that you have to make where one of those guys goes out and you get that back. So it's more of having options and alternatives to kind of swing in the direction you need to swing when you get to a matchup that creates that. So Miami couldn't really do anything this year with that because Quinn deployed max shooting, and that was enough against Miami. That was enough at times against Boston, but when Boston really had their best defensive lineups on the court, they get to their second option, their second action, and that would be about as far as they can go, and that's not going to be good enough.
Right, I agree, and it is. There's a conversation to be had that maybe we'll save for later in the summer about, like, it's very possible that the best version of this Hawks team, the contending version, kind of needs AJ and or Jalen to really pop. That's a realistic thing to say. I don't know if it's going to happen, but as far as like their true ultimate upside, and this is of course that of course removes the trades and all that stuff, but like internally, those are the guys that have the upside. I think the DeAndre Hunter offensive breakout is probably not going to happen at the highest level. I think he can improve things for sure, but like he's 25. He's not going to suddenly become an offensive star. Same with Collins and his role and stuff. So internally, it is the young guys, but you and I think agree on this. They were not ready, and AJ not playing is not because they don't like AJ. They love AJ internally. They just knew that he was a rookie and defensively it was going to be untenable and all these things. So that's why he didn't play. And Jalen, they just weren't guarding Jalen. It is what it is.
And despite that, Jalen, for who he is, was so good in that series overall.
Yeah, he played very well. Yeah, he did. I totally agree. It was just, and this is kind of a rabbit hole, but it was stark to me. Like, you could argue they were letting Collins and even Hunter at times, they were letting especially Collins shoot whenever he wanted to from three. Not wide open. They were at least closing out. Jalen, they weren't even really closing out. I mean, they were really ignoring Jalen. There was a different kind of attention or not paying attention to Jalen. And you'll see that in the playoffs. That's one of those things that's a very very kind of series playoff dependent thing. In the regular season, I don't think you would have seen Boston be that dismissive of anyone. Right. But that's one of those things about the playoffs is that you can, and you see it if you watch, I know you watch this all the time, but for listeners, if you watch other series, this happens all the time in different series. Teams will just be like, you know what, we're not going to guard this guy anymore. And
come on, Looney. Like I put a play from that game one of that Lakers Warriors where the Warriors do something the Hawks maybe have to do. The Warriors lifted Looney up, got him into a DHO, and created a shot because AD was down basically under the rim, and
And they're the best at it, by the way. The Warriors are the best at it because Draymond's been doing it for years. That's nobody. Yeah,
the Hawks don't have that like in their system right now. But it's a real thing. And Quin was, and like I said earlier, Quin was like, you got to take those shots. You got to take those shots. And it wasn't like, Boston was like, now we have to cover him. But you could see like there was a beat where they thought about, do I close out or do I not close out? He made the last one, right?
Well, and even then, like as much as Jalen's not a great shooter right now, if he's wide open and in rhythm, that's still a pretty decent shot. Absolutely. Even with his current performance level from three, he's going to probably make 35% of those. You would imagine wide open catch and shoots. That's not great, but as far as like your offense against Boston, this great defense, if they're going to give you that shot. Quin knows that, and send him with Collins. Like we all know Collins didn't have a good shooting season. There was no question. Every bit of messaging was like, John, you have to shoot this. And I know fans didn't like it when they weren't going in, and I get it. But process-wise, if you just do the math, that's a good shot against Boston. A wide open catch and shoot three for those guys is a good shot. So I think Quin encouragingly knows the math and cares about the math and pushes it. And I'm not saying you have to be Daryl Morey and everything's about numbers, but like Quin does understand like the process and all that, which I find particularly encouraging.
Sure. Yeah.
Just saying.
Yeah. And I mean, and like, if Jalen's 35%, that's offensive rating 105, when he takes
plus rebounds and everything else.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. Right. And maybe if he's wide open, maybe it's 36, and the next thing you're getting a little higher. But it's not necessarily whether that shot goes in or not. It's the impact it has to the way Boston has to defend, right?
Yep.
A willing shooter has a lot of value. I kind of go back. I mean, first of all, like the starkest memory I have of a guy just really being ignored, Andre Roberson, and during those kind of 6 or 7 years ago at Oklahoma City.
OKC, yeah, it was
absolutely basically a defensive player of the year type of kind of impact, as an individual defender, right, and stuff like that. But then, I also kind of go back to, Mike D'Antoni really tried to make Carmelo Anthony work in Houston, and the only reason it didn't work was Carmelo was shooting like 11% from three or something a month in the season.
Yep.
And D'Antoni was like, "You still have to take those shots. You have to. Our system does not work if you don't take those shots." And eventually, they were like, "Yeah, he's not doing it."
Yeah,
so, I mean, Jalen's willingness. I like when I talked to Kevin, I said the progression of Jalen of going from "I'm terrified to take this shot" to "Okay, I'll reluctantly take this shot" to not. By the time we got to game 5 or whatever, it was like, I'm taking this shot. That's progression. That's development. That's improvement. That's good.
100% agree. And it is one of those things, and this is not a sexy answer, but a lot of the stuff in a playoff context, especially if you ever have teams that are close together. And look, Boston was better than Atlanta this year, but even within a couple of those, in game 6, there was some make or miss league stuff in there. Game 4, same thing. That was a winnable game if the Hawks made more shots. And then you could also argue game 3 had some of that in the Hawks direction. So did game 5. So back and forth, but doing it and being willing and not hesitating, especially for support guys, like, Trey's the one that's going to drive a lot of it. And we all know that, but when he sets up a great shot for somebody and they record scratch it, it hurts your offense. You have to do what you're supposed to do on the floor. That includes everybody, even the support guy. And look, and they're going to play, at least right now, they have a roster where they're never going to play a lineup that has less than 4 capable-ish shooters. Jalen's probably their worst shooter, other than Clint, obviously, and Oneka, but they're always playing at least 4 guys who can shoot. That's one of the good things about this Hawks roster, you could argue, is that they don't have any non-shooters on the perimeter. Jalen's the closest thing they have to that, but I firmly believe as early as this coming season, no one will be referring to him as a non-shooter anymore. I think he'll be maybe below average from 3, all those things, but like they don't have any non-shooters.
Right.
That's not a bad place to be at offensively. And we'll talk about the defense in a second. And that all matters. And it's all one big mix. And I'm unfair by making it seem like they're 2 different games, offensive defense, because they're not. But it stood out to me. And look, not to put a point on it too fine a point here, but they scored at a very, very high level against a very good defense in the playoffs, and that is not a small thing.
Yeah.
So
and I think thinking about the offseason before we go to defense,
yeah,
a major impact from that, a major implication from that is, I think if they went into that Boston series and just couldn't really do anything offensively,
like Miami last year,
yeah, I think they're like, we're going back to the drawing board and we're going to like rework this in a huge way. We have to do that. I think coming out of the Boston series with Bay in the mix, with Bogey being healthy, with John getting some rhythm across the series, with DJ helping in game 1 and 2, I think you're like, okay, we don't have to do anything crazy, right? We don't have to do anything crazy. We can be opportunistic and chase value and chase the right opportunity for us, and not be in a situation where like, oh my God, this is broken, and we've got to just make some big, we have to shake it up, right? And I hate that kind of mentality of like, we got to shake it up. Like, well, is shaking up getting better, or just you're just changing the variables or whatever? But I think the main thing is that they're like, okay, we have a workable foundation on offense. We just need to, get a little better, get a little more shooting, etc. And I think that's one reason I'm glad they got into the Boston series, because I wanted that test for them to kind of, for that to reveal what they had, what they didn't have, what they could solve, what they couldn't solve. And I think this team was seen for exactly what it is in that series. And I'm, for them and for Hawks fans, I'm so glad that is as how it played out, But I think they now they go to the drawing board. They're like, we're closer than I think most people think we are. Sure, we have to change. Sure, we have to mix things up. Sure, there are some limitations we have that are going to get exposed when we get deep into the playoffs. But we don't have to go shake it up just to shake it up. We don't have to go pursue change for the sake of change. We can look at value and opportunity and let those be the priorities.
All right, that is it for part 1 of my 2-part conversation with my friend Glen Willis. If you are inclined to do so, and we definitely encourage you to do so, part 2 should be in your feeds shortly. If not already, please subscribe to this podcast anywhere you get your podcasts: Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, TuneIn Radio. Also, we're on YouTube on the video side. Please follow the show on Twitter at Locked On Hawks. Follow me on Twitter at BT Rowland. Follow Glenn as well at Willis_Glenn. And we'll see you all next time.